Welcome to the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Lawvere, and I'm joined with my co-host, Chris Crawford. Thank you for listening in to another episode of the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Lawvere, and I'm joined by Chris Crawford, my co-host, and I'm also joined by Bruce Bump. For anybody who doesn't know Bruce, shame on you. He is an ABS mastersmith, a pioneer of the cut and shoot, and just an all-around great guy. And we have the honor of being able to get to talk to him today. So thanks for joining us, Bruce.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
So I guess probably the best place to start is at the beginning. And can you give an introduction to everybody who might not know you, and to tell a little bit about yourself, your family, hobbies, things like that might not necessarily be knife related, but just gives a little bit of detail into you as a person?
Yeah, you bet. I'm Bruce Bump. I live in Walla Walla, Washington. Married to Kay Bump for 47 years. I was born in Kansas in 1951 and moved out here in 64 to Walla Walla, Melton Freewater, Oregon, and ended up in Walla Walla about 40 years ago. And it's really nice out here in the Pacific Northwest. But I loved knives ever since I can remember as a Cub Scout. My mom was our den leader, and back then nobody worried about knives. We took them to school. We played with them all day long, cut ourselves, and no one even cared. It was a lot of fun back then. Now they're called a weapon at school, and I have to keep my grandson and his locked up a little bit when he's, school week. So anyway, I became a mechanic, and 35 years in the motorcycle industry, Japanese motorcycles. And in 1996, I had my own shop that failed, motorcycle shop, but I was selling knives at that time, so I just went back home and stayed home in my own shop and made knives since 1996. In 1999, I became a master, or a journeyman, with the American Bladesmith Society, the ABS. And in 2003, went for mastersmith and got that. So I've been making knives here since then. It's been a good time, good life, good job for an older guy, that doesn't need to get out and don't need to drive anywhere, can hang out in the shop all day and have fun and still make some money. That worked good for me. It's working good.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the most endearing things that I notice about you is like you are by Shackleford's definition one of the greatest living knife makers, and everybody should really like observe your work and your artistry, because it's compelling, especially if new knife makers or even established ones are looking for a muse to establish their own footprint in the industry. But what so you went through this process of going through the ABS and learning knives and everything, but what really got you to the place where you are at now, where you're making art knives and cut and shoots and things like that? Was there any point in time in your knife making journey that made you decide to go down this avenue versus, I don't know, making semi-production knives or anything like that? Like how did you get from where you started to where you're at now?
Well, that's kind of a long, many years. My first knife, I sawed it. I cut it out of a saw blade with a cutting torch and put an elk antler on it. Sold it for $25. And my gosh, I could do this. So the next one was like 35, and they just went up and up from there. And I used that money because I was a mechanic at the time. I just used all that all that money I made, 25 and $50 at a time, and put it in my shop. Bought belts and started making tools and buying tools and just equipping my shop. So when I got old, I could just, hang out and do that. Make knives until I can't make knives no more. And, the thing is that you can only make so many knives of the same type that you just kind of get tired of it. So, after a few years, I was ready to move on to something different. And I looked around to see what everyone else is making, and they were all making hunting knives, and I was making hunting knives. And I decided to try something like Wade Coulter did. He had at Blade Show Atlanta one year. He had a Bowie knife, this beautiful Bowie, but right on the side was a flintlock pistol. And I was thinking, God dang, I like, I've made a pistol before. It was just a kit, a flintlock, and it's fun. Black powder shooting is a lot of fun because it's so cheap to do and takes a long time to load, and you only get one shot, so you better be on target and that kind of thing. And man, his was so beautiful, and people were looking at it, and I was looking at it, and everybody was drooling over it. I think he won something, an award. So yeah, I asked him if it's okay if I try that. He says, "Yeah, please be my guest." So I put a pistol together with a barrel cut off of a Sears 22. You find Sears gun, you find all kinds of scrap guns. There's a lot of them. You can just repurpose those parts, not the parts, but the barrel. You have to make your own part, the trigger and the hammer and the sear and the springs, the hammer springs, and the return spring for the trigger. And, it's kind of delicate, but it's what I was used to because I was a mechanic, motorcycle mechanic. Japanese motorcycles are really, really difficult and mechanical and kind of tricky, the way they do things in Japan. So it's kind of fit right in on the mechanic part of knives, and it worked really good with guns. I made a tomahawk, Brutus. I've made one a year for 12 years, and I think I'm up to like 15 now. 15 cut and shoots, or what I call dual threats.
Bruce, I noticed that like one of your last ones that you've been posting is more modern looking. What inspiration do you have, or what how do you decide which style of cut and shoot you're gonna make, or which one you're taking on next? Like where do you get that inspiration?
Well, that's a good question. If you take a gun and a knife and try to marry those two together as a dual threat weapon, one or the other is not going to fit your hand. There's a compromise. You have to compromise somewhere, whether it's the gun or it's the knife. The gun, it's generally you have to tilt it way down to line up the sights, and that's kind of not very modern. Like now we have guns that just fit your hand. You just lay your target down. You don't even need sights. Your hand is just aims right at that target. So more ergonomic and more modern, like the modern is 1911. This one that I'm making now is basically a 1911 with the same angle. I believe it's 175 angle, so it just fits really nice in your hand, and it just aims for you. And then trying to get the blade attached to something like that. So what I'm doing now is putting it on the side. I made one other one. It's called the Sidewinder that our son Brian engraved. It was really expensive. It took us forever to build it, and then we didn't sell it for enough. So that's another thing. The market is pretty narrow on cut and shoots, it seems like. But the people that love them, they love them. So anyway, that's what I do. I'm trying to get one that feels right, that aims right, that I can be more practical with than just a knife with a gun on the side.
Yeah, something that I've wondered about is like I come from the generation of being able to use the internet for research, right? And even in the modern era, it's not like you can just look up, dual threat or cut and shoots or things like that and have all of the details with it. Like it's a highly technical, highly specified subdivision of knife making. Like how did you like actually get the information or knowledge compiled? I mean, other than just by sheer will, determination, and stubbornness. Like, was there any materials or any literature out there to help guide you in that process?
No, not really. I got on the internet in 1999, and I don't remember ever seeing anything on there that is interesting to me this way. But you know what? God has designed us with our own talents and our own path of thinking, and I just thought my way through it. There was a couple of hints in Brownell's magazine or Brownell's catalog. John Brownell, he was actually going to buy a cut and shoot from me at one of the shows, but it didn't have a couple of things he wanted on it. I told him I'd make him one. By the time I got around to it, he'd already switched gears or something, but never did make it for him. But John or Brownell's catalog, it has heat treating advice and hardness for like the trigger and the hammer and the sear and how to make springs and the tempering, the temperature and the color. Read the color of the steel. You know, you can just figure all that stuff out. If you can heat treat a blade that will chop through a 2x4 twice, still cut our hair and bend it in a vise to 90 degrees, you ought to be able to heat treat a trigger and a hammer and a spring to operate them. I mean, it's not that much scientific. It's not very scientific. But you know what? I was thinking the other day that we all have people that we've grown up with that influence us, and I believe that we get a lot of influence from our dad. And my dad always liked guns. We used to go out and shoot a lot. And my grandpa, he was a good shot. My dad was excellent shot. We did trap shooting. And I just take those guns apart sometimes. Not those guns, but junk guns. Like I say, you can find junk guns about anywhere. The pawn shop, or they give them to you almost because they're no good. Um, just buy those things and take them apart. Just like a folding knife. I didn't know how folding knives worked, but I bought a couple of them. And I just take them apart and look at them and see how they tick, see what makes them work. So that's pretty much how I got going on guns anyway, and knives too, folding knives, especially like trappers, like single blade trapper. I just still like making those, but a lot of people are making them. I'd like to try to make. I like making stuff that not everybody's making.
Yeah, I think that case in point is your Formula One automatic knife. I've always been really impressed with the mechanism and how it looks and feels, and how interesting the safety is on it. Can you talk a little bit about how you kind of, I don't know, thought through that? Because I mean, the mechanism is, to my knowledge, 100% your invention, right? There's no others quite like it.
Hmm. Yeah, I've never seen another one like it. I take knives apart and look at them, and the pivot points are all the same, and the locking are usually behind and below the pivot point, and there's this one I started as a prototype and just kept building it and throwing parts away, learning from those parts, making more until I got it to work. And I think that's what happens is people just give up and then just try to make one like everybody else is making. But that takes the challenge away. is to make it like everyone else. That's what got me into pistols in the beginning. Was I just didn't want to follow the leader and make a folder like everyone else. So this is my own lock, good or bad. I've been playing with my own now for a couple of years. You've got one.
Bruce, what was the? I was going to look it up online. I'm not familiar with that knife he's talking about. I want to look it up. What's the name of it?
Oh, Formula One. If you go on my website, you'll see it.
Okay, all right.
Or F1, Formula One. I named it that because of the carbon fiber is off of real Formula One cars.
Okay.
British made Rick Sherwood, call him Big Rick. He makes he makes carbon fiber, and he sends me some of it. And do you carry it every day?
Yeah, I carry it very often. Like I have a few knives that are in my rotation for everyday carry, and yours is one of them. So I carry it about around quite a bit, but I do have to make some modifications to uh, the the pocket clip I have on it, because I find sometimes that it slips out on me. And I mean, it's 100% like my pocket clip, because it's just the L bracket, like a slip clip that we talked about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. That's one thing I like about my F1 or Formula One knife is it's able to, you could take it apart and hot rod it. You can change the spring tension. You can change the spring, the clip on it from right to left. There's a lot of things you can do. You can lubricate the bearings, service them, replace them. The parts in it you can buy off the shelf, the internet shelf anyway. And like the scales, you can replace those. They screw on. You want to make your own scales, and it's titanium frame, so you can even anodize it if you like, or carve on it, engrave it, anodize it, do about anything you need to do. The blades are stainless steel, or you could copy that blade in with a Damascus blade. It's the tricky part is the catch on it. The lock itself is just a little hook. It looks like a fish hook. And if you cut that fish hook too short, it won't work. And if it's too long, it won't work. So that's the trickiest part of the whole knife is that sliding lock that hooks that blade when it's closed. It's got a nice click to it and it works good, but you have to pull the blade in to pull the lock back. So it takes a thumb and a forefinger to open it.
I'm looking at a picture of the knife. So is that how you deploy it? I'm just by looking at the picture, I'm guessing you put like a forefinger on that top part and push it down or maybe slide it back. How does that work?
Slide it back.
Slide it back. Okay. All right.
If you look at it real close, it looks like a 1911 pistol slide, only miniature. It slides.
Okay.
It's all made from CNC, my design, and we've tweaked it and tweaked it until it works. It took me a couple years probably to get it to work right.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's really a neat knife. They sell for $1,000 or less, and not everybody wants to spend $1,000 on one knife. They can buy a lot of knives for that. So the sales, they're pretty far between. I think it's a cool knife, and it's going to be a classic someday because there is not very many produced.
Right.
So, Bruce, what I think is compelling and interesting about you is that you really take a lot of time and invest a lot of yourself in educating other makers in things, right? So if they have questions, you're always there to answer and just be a good mentor. What Yeah, I know that I mean, your work takes an exceptional amount of time, and where do you get the extra time and to focus on, carrying on the knowledge and everything when people ask you about it? And can you talk a little bit, maybe about the newer generation of knife makers and maybe observations or things that you have on them?
Yeah, Forged in Fire has really spawned a lot of new knife makers. Of course, they're still heating and beating them. I don't beat anything anymore. My wrist went out on me several years ago. So I built a hydraulic press, so I don't have to hammer them anymore. I can just make dies that do what I want to do, and mostly just make Damascus and stock removal. But I can still make tapers and distal tapers, and I can make first primary bevels with my press and that kind of thing. Anything you can do with a hand hammer, I can do with my hydraulic press. So I've taught people online how to make their own press, and several of them have done it. It's not hard. It's just like a log splitter, basically, with interchangeable dies. I've told a lot of people how to do it, and I think it's caught on. I learned it from the old Montana guys. It's called the Imagination Express. That's what mine is patterned after. But yeah, you're right. I've taught a lot of online, mostly knifedogs.com. There's a forum on there that they gave me free, so I took advantage of it, and I've got about 6,000 pictures on there, and shows how to do a lot of patterns. And W's from Walla Walla is probably one of the best ones that shows feather pattern, how to make a feather pattern. That's become real popular. I certainly wasn't the first to do it, but I got good at it. I've kind of gotten tired of it though after seeing so many now. So I like the mosaics. With the press, you can make a lot of mosaic patterns, and they're all different depending on what you do with them. And there's a million different designs.
Bruce, talk about with your knives and your guns and stuff that you make, um, and you having a mechanical background. Do you have a lot of machines like CNC milling, or are you doing all that by hand, or kind of talk about your progression of machines and what you found to be very helpful for the particular, and you already mentioned your press, but for the particular type of work that you do, what's invaluable, and talk a little bit maybe about how you got by before you got that machine.
Yeah, that's a good question. My machine started out very rudimentary. I had a shopsmith. I used to do woodworking before metalworking. So I used my shopsmith, and it had a bandsaw and drill press and boring machine, and everything that works good on wood, and a disc grinder even. And I used that until it started getting worn, and got rid of that and bought a disc grinder and a drill press and a better bandsaw, and everything with knife money. I spent all my or saved all my profits and put it into equipment. But you can't buy everything you really want right at first. So I was making my own grinders. I built a couple of them. I built a the best one I built, or is I'm still using it, about 10 years. It's a it's an army tank wheel, and it's kind of famous because it's actually off of an army tank idler wheel, and it's got rubber. I call it government rubber because it's really tough. That stuff is on there, and it's just as hard as can be. It's still good after World War II until now. It's still a good wheel. But I had to cut it down. It was 3 inches wide. I needed 2 inches wide, but 24 inches means you can't use a standard belt. So I went to 132-inch belts. And it's a variable speed. I like that DC motor instead of the AC motor that the people are using. They use a 3-phase and put a phase converter, and to get variable speed. But a DC motor, you could buy them cheaper and buy a controller for a lot less than you can any other method. And they have brushes, so you can rebuild them. And they go really slow if you want. Like I said, my hands are bad, so So I just turn it way down and do my hand sanding pretty much on the
Hmm.
machine, and then clean it up by hand afterwards. But if you can turn that machine really slow, you can do some really fine grind lines. Or turn it up fast; it'll go 55 miles an hour. We figure you can gear it too. When you make your own machines, you can change the gearing. You can put different pulleys on them and change it, go faster or slower, more powerful or more torque. And this one's got 1 inch to 7 inches, so it's got plenty of torque.
Hmm.
The motor is 1 inch pulley. Well, actually, it's 2 inch pulley, and then the driven pulley is 7 inches. So that's like 2 to 7, I guess, and it's got a lot of power.
Wow.
Only with just with a 1 horsepower grinder
Yeah.
motor.
You mentioned this, and this was something that when we were talking to Matt Cullum, and I think it's probably a lot of our experiences. You talk about, when you started out and you were making knives and putting that money back into your shop. That's the one nice thing. When you got into it, I don't know if you got into it originally as a hobby, but I think most of us do. But um, that is one nice thing about the knife making hobby is that it is, it is something that you can turn around and put the money back in to build your shop and to build. It's like you sell something, you make a little money, you put the money back in the shop, you can buy a little nicer equipment, which does not make you a better knife maker, but it makes knife making a little, it allows you to be a little more precise in your knife making, and it makes things go a little bit easier, and it just kind of continues on like that, where a lot of hobbies don't. I'd mentioned to you, I think before, one of the times where we weren't recording, that some of the other hobbies and stuff that I do, but I come back to knife making when I'm running out of running out of hobby money for my fishing and my other stuff, because knife making is the hobby that can pay back into itself. But as an early knife maker just getting started, I was, and it's particularly one wanting to make folders, I bought several books on folder making, and I was discouraged because the projects in the books, people had really nice equipment, surface grinders, and all that stuff. And as someone just getting started, I didn't have that, and kind of had to improvise. Um, but it's neat hearing you and Matt saying basically the same thing. Is that you start off very simple, you with that shop. I forgot what you call it, that big all-in-one shop tool, but a lot of us with just Harbor Freight drill press and 1x30s and that kind of stuff, and you know, it, and have been blessed to be able to make and sell some knives and build our shop over the years. But that's neat that
Yeah,
you've kind of mentioned the same thing.
I still don't have any CNC equipment. Everything's manual, and most of it's just fly by the seat of my pants. I mill it out and then measure it. I don't measure it and then set the machine. So I'm not really a machinist at all. I did go to school for about 3 quarters at night for a machine shop, and that got me into sharpening tools and know how to use a milling machine and and a lathe, a metal lathe, properly. But there's a lot of math involved to do it really proper, and get a if you were a machinist, they'd probably fire me if I had to apply for a machine shop job.
When you're designing your guns, are you doing that just on paper, or are you doing like you say, just by the seat of your pants? I mean, you got to build a sear, and you got to build a trigger, and you got to build this and that, and like, how do you go about from the time, and let me back up a little and say I really do appreciate you putting your steps online, or your progress online. That's always fun to watch, where you're coming with it. But when you get ready to start a new gun, what do you do? I mean, are you drawing that out? Are you CADing it up, or what are you doing there?
Well, I've got a file full of drawings that I've made the gun after the drawing, but it's never exactly like the drawing, so it's not actually a working blueprint. But I have tried to add, even after the gun is built, I try and go back and write down what drill bit size and what reamer size and what screw this is and what screw thread and, that kind of thing, if I ever want to build that one again. The thing is, I'm so tired of it by the time I build it that I'm ready to move on to something else. So I'd never make anything twice, basically. But, what was I gonna say? Um, Now I just drew it out on notebook paper on the bench, like this one. This one has no drawing at all. I'm just flying by the seat of my pants on this one. There's no set anything, no plans at all. I'm just building it, and it's a lot of fun that way. A lot of people do knives that way. They don't know. They just forge it and then just start grinding, and pretty soon it looks like a knife. And they put a handle on it, and it's cool. But guns are a little more technical than that. You have to draw a few pictures and make sure they work. The problem with that is you make the parts and they don't work. And you spent half a day or a day on a part that you've just thrown away. But if you make the parts out of something flimsy like real thin sheet steel or aluminum or in anything that you can manipulate or bend or twist and make it work, and then make the part from that as a template, then it saves a lot of time.
Yeah, I bet.
You know,
I noticed on this. I'm
hammers.
sorry. Good.
Oh, I was just gonna say hammers. This is I'm on my third hammer on this one, and now we've got the frame. I've got a grandson. I've got a TIG welder. I'm just not very good at it because my eyes aren't that great anymore. But he's a professional TIG welder, and I call him up, and he'll weld a part on the frame, and it looks like it's been on there the whole time because you grind it down and smooth it and buff it. Looks like
Hmm.
it was designed on there, but no, they're just parts welded on the frames. And the barrel too, just weld that barrel right on a piece of steel and just start building it from there.
Hmm.
It's a lot of fun.
This one you're building now, if I recall, is a 45 caliber. Is that correct?
Yeah, 45.
It,
It's,
is it percussion cap or how or what is it? What does it take?
well, this one has an adapter. I can't think of the name that or the company that sold them, but it screws into the back of the barrel. You have to make a breech plug and then tap it, drill and tap it, and then screw this adapter in. And the adapter holds a number 209 primer, which is nothing more than if you're a reloader, it's just a shotgun primer, and they're really powerful. They're loud, and that ignites the main charge in the barrel, and it's cleaner, a lot cleaner burning than if you'd had a nipple like a musket with a cap on it.
Right.
It's a lot easier to clean the gun afterwards because there's no flash. It doesn't flash out all over, and there's no smoke, so you can tell if you've hit your target.
Are there any type of regulations, like what's the divide between the type of guns you're building and say somebody that's building something, like that they'd have to register with the ATF or
You
how does
know,
that all work?
the trick is for me, I don't have an FFL, Federal Firearms License, but the trick is it has to load from the front and
Okay.
not the breech. Like a gun that cocks open, you can load it, even muzzle load it from the breech. That's not a muzzle loader. That is a breech loading gun, and they're regulated. You have to have
Hmm.
those registered. You should be have a certificate, a manufacturer's certificate, and then have it certified or with a gunsmith, and then they can sell it, and then transfer ownership. Paperwork. and then wait your 2 weeks or whatever it is. But no, mine are muzzle loading, so they have to be loaded through the barrel from the muzzle end of the barrel. You just pour powder in there, put a wad on or a patch, and or some bullets are soft lead. You just put a little grease on them and push them on down till it's solid against the powder. Put the primer on and pull the trigger, and makes a lot of noise, and it's not very accurate. But but I've got saboted bullets with this one, which means that there's a casing over them. It's a plastic casing with a hollow back, and it will hold a bullet. Like mine's a 45, so the plastic has to be 45 caliber, but the bullet itself inside the plastic could be like a 36 or 40 or 38 or whatever. It's got to be smaller, and those are a lot more accurate because they look like a mini ball. They're a conical shape, look like a little rocket. You can get different bullets for hunting that have got hollow points or silver points. There's a lot of different bullets out there. So just because it loads from the front doesn't mean it has to be an inaccurate bullet. And my barrels are just repurposed gun barrels, so they've got lands and grooves in them for a twist. They're twisted, and they make that bullet twist and fly straight. The problem is sights. You got to put sights on it, and I file them in, or I weld them on, or I use a dovetail cutter and slide them in. You can buy sights in Brownell's catalog if you want. I've never actually bought any. I make my own. But I built a gun. I've still got it. I should show that at the Atlanta show. Um, and it's got fiber optics, which is nice and
Oh
bright.
wow.
Yeah, it's pretty modern for a muzzle loader, and it's built off a 1911 frame, the angle.
Hmm.
So it's really comfortable. It's got almost a 12-inch barrel, and the barrel is so heavy I had to put a beaver tail under your hand so that you don't lose grip on it. It kind of sets in your hand, and you don't have to white knuckle it to shoot it because of that heavy barrel. Anyway, there's a million different guns you can make. And that one doesn't have a blade on it though. So if we're talking knives, we can't talk about that one.
We're talking all things made. So, well, let me ask you this. I may not be remembering right, but did you have a brother who did engraving?
Yeah, it's our son, Brian.
Oh, it's your son who does it. Okay. All
Yeah.
right. So does he do the engraving on all of your work?
He was doing it for about 5 years, and it takes him too long to make a good living at it. He's so particular and such a perfectionist that he spends months on a job that he can't make money unless he can get it whipped out in weeks.
Right.
So he had to go get a different job, and now he likes this new job. So I've got engraving equipment probably going to be for sale because I don't think I've got years in me to learn it.
Hmm.
I'm too busy with playing around with them anyway to start a new career engraving. Yeah, engraving has always been a problem. People love to see engraving, but I don't think it really pays off sometimes. I can, if I sell a knife for a certain amount, I have to add the engraving cost on top of that, and that puts it out of the ballpark for some collectors, quite a few collectors. So lately, I've been not engraving them and just letting the new customer or owner or collector, if he wants it engraved, he can find an engraver or use one of my favorite ones and spend the money separately. That way, the money, the engraving cost doesn't go through my account, and I don't have to be a middleman for the engraving.
So when you were making the High Roller and War and Peace, did you make the book casing and everything yourself to fit everything in it, or was that something that you sent off for?
My neighbor was, he since died. That's why you don't see any more books. But he was a bindery supervisor at the library bindery here in town. He went home and started his own little business called the Book Tinker, and he would do Bibles mostly. And I built a book. I just bought a ream of paper and glued all the pages together and then cut the center out. And then he put the binding on it, the leather binding, and then he can put my name in it. Like the High Roller, it says by Bruce D. Bump. And I think War and Peace too says Bruce D. Bump as the author. And it's just a way of storing it. Basically, that's what it started as. Where do you put these? And if you don't have room in the safe, you can store them in your library or your den on a bookshelf, and nobody really knows what it is. They don't. They don't. It looks more like a encyclopedia than than anything else. But I think I've got one book left from him, and it's a Bible. I think I'm going to make one in a Bible next time, which has got to be small because the Bible is only like 8.5 by 11. So it's going to be fairly small.
Yeah, for anybody who's been following along with you on social media and your knife or your sword build, how is that going? And what are some like caveats to going from smaller fixed blades to doing cut and shoots to going to larger swords? Like do you snap into that pretty easily, or are there things that you have to like remember when you're kind of switching artistic mediums?
Well, swords are, that is a whole different ball game. There's professional sword makers, and that's all they do. I make a little bit of everything, and swords included. But this cut and bend test that the ABS puts you through, you need to know how to heat treat a sword, and that's always been a stopper for me until recently. How do you get that sword evenly heat treated the entire way? And if you use a mosaic method, how do you keep those last welds from breaking if you wanted to bend that thing at 90 degrees in a vise? It should do it. You should be able to take your sword and bend it, and it should not maybe go straight again, but it's more of a spring temper than it is a hard steel temper. Unless you're building a katana, then they're pretty much full hard on the edge and then soft in the center. And that's a whole different. I don't speak Japanese, so I've never made a Japanese sword, but I have made some Viking type swords, double edged. And I like my method is to make mosaic, which is the tiling method, but then split that down the middle and open it up. To do that, you use a bandsaw. It takes about 2 hours of cutting right down the center of that mosaic sword, 40 inches long, and then open it up and then surface both sides or both insides, and then put a piece of solid steel as a sanmai in the center. So that would be your cutting edge. And then put those two back together and dry weld, all the way around the edges, and put that back together and weld it together, and then go ahead and make the stock removal sword out of that. So, and that way the core holds everything together. So I believe my swords will bend. I've never really tried them, but I do it the ABS method of heat treating, and I believe that it would bend and spring back mostly anyway, depending on your final tempering. Your spring temper is about 50, 51, 52. My swords are about 54 and 56. As the spring doesn't hold an edge, but 56 is real close to a good edge holding hardness. Anyway, to heat treat that, I built a heat treating oven out of two kilns. They're Scut brand, Scut ceramic kilns, and I cut them down so they're smaller, and they're 24 inches high each. So two of them is 48 inches high. And then I put a PID controller, which is a little digital controller, and I can adjust the temperature just perfectly in those. But trouble is, it's 4 feet tall, so you have to climb a ladder. I've used a pulley and a hook on a cable and just lower the sword point down in those kilns and adjust it, and I can pull it out and quench it. I've got videos on, I think it's on Instagram of that. It's pretty neat. That's what I'm doing nowadays anyway. The first swords would fit in my oven. I've got a even heat oven that's 27 inches long. So the first swords were only had about a 24-inch blade. But this one's got 42-inch. It's pretty long.
So, Bruce, we ask this of all of our guests, but if there's one or many pieces of advice that you can give to new and maybe intermediate knife makers, what would that be?
Yeah, I got advice on not to even be a knife maker when when I was in that stage, and I've always remembered that. And sometimes it's tough to be a full-time knife maker, especially if you've got bills to pay and truck and trailer payments and mortgage payments. It's really tough. It takes all the fun out of knife making. It really does. You still enjoy your job. You like to go to work in the morning, but that stress is there that you have to sell. So my advice is to don't quit your daytime job just to be a full-time knife maker. It's tough. It's really tough. Now we've got more competition than ever. I'm one of the old guys. I've started in 1989, but now since Forged in Fire, there's a lot of knife makers. And what they're doing is they make knives, and they're good knives, and they're giving them away or selling them to friends and relatives. So that's where all of the friends and relatives are getting their knives from the newer makers. So it kind of cut some of a market out for us old guys, I think. And the collectors, I have some really good collectors. Some of them are from overseas. I got knives all over the world. But my best collector was Preston Goff. God rest his soul, he died. And man, I miss him because he would buy anything I made. He was just my best collector, and he loved everything I came up with, and he would buy it. He had the money to buy it. But it seems like it's a little bit tougher right now.
Well, Bruce, I think this is probably a good place to wind it down. Um, I hope it almost goes without saying, but I feel that you deserve to hear it, that you're a cherished and loved member of the knife making community, and your art will go down in history as one of the premier examples of not only knife making, but with your cut and shoots and everything. And it has been an absolute pleasure to get to hear you, get to talk to you about your life and your work, and to get a little bit of advice. So thank you so much for spending your time with us. And we hope that Blade Show Atlanta goes really well for you. And it's, again, just been a pleasure.
Well, Aaron, I really appreciate you too. You've always talked to me at shows, knife shows, and we become friends when I was in Texas. you came down there and spent time with us and took us out to dinner, and we walked around the Texas Cowboy. What was that? Stockyard. Stockyards. Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun to do
And
that. Yeah.
you know, you went above and beyond just as a never met you type of friend. It's, that's what's neat about the internet is you make a lot of friends. You just don't know what they look like. Thank you so much for doing this. This is gonna be fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks again for listening in to another episode of the Good Old Blades podcast. Just remember that you are loved and God bless.